When reality stops trusting you, the signal inference loop. Chapter 1, the first crack, invalidation. There is a very specific kind of moment that changes how perception works, and it usually does not look important while it is happening. Something is experienced directly, cleanly, without ambiguity in the body. A tone is felt, a meaning is understood. A situation lands in an immediate and undeniable way, then it gets denied, not always through aggression, sometimes through correction, sometimes through reinterpretation, sometimes through someone calmly explaining that what you perceived is not what actually happened. At first, the mind treats this normally. It assumes misunderstanding, it adjusts itself, it recalibrates. But when this pattern repeats over time, something deeper begins to shift. It is no longer just the event being questioned. It is your confidence in your ability to interpret reality itself, and this is the first fracture point. Because perception is not merely sensory input. Perception is trust in sensory input. Once that trust is interrupted, reality stops feeling self-confirming. The mind begins waiting for external validation before accepting what it already felt internally. That waiting state becomes the beginning of destabilization, not because reality has changed, but because certainty about reality has become unstable. Chapter 2. Destabilization, when reality stops feeling reliable. After repeated invalidation, the structure of perception begins reorganizing itself around uncertainty. The mind no longer treats surface-level information as complete. What is seen is no longer enough. What is heard is no longer enough. Every interaction begins to feel partial, unfinished, or concealed beneath another layer. So the mind expands its scan. It starts analyzing tone, timing, emotional shifts, pauses, contradictions, omissions, and behavioral patterns across time. Not because it wants complexity, but because it is trying to restore consistency. Consistency is what was lost when direct perception stopped feeling trustworthy. At this stage, reality no longer feels immediate, it feels encoded. Simple conversations begin carrying psychological weight. Silence no longer feels neutral. Delay no longer feels neutral. A shift in tone becomes loaded with possible meaning. The nervous system enters a constant state of interpretive monitoring. Nothing is allowed to remain only what it appears to be. Everything becomes potentially connected to something underneath itself. And the more this process intensifies, the more unstable direct perception becomes. Because perception is no longer being experienced directly. It is being filtered through a system that assumes hidden structure by default. Chapter 3. The shift, from perception to signal reading. At a certain point, the structure of awareness changes completely. Communication stops feeling direct. Instead, it begins feeling layered. Words become only one part of the interaction. What is implied becomes equally important. What is withheld becomes equally important. And what is absent begins carrying meaning of its own. This creates a split between two realities. The first reality is what objectively occurs. The second reality is the interpretive layer constructed beneath it. Over time, the interpretive layer starts feeling more convincing than the surface layer. Not because it is more accurate, but because it explains more. It resolves ambiguity. It fills in gaps. It creates continuity where direct reality feels fragmented or unstable. This is where signal reading begins. The mind starts treating communication as encoded transmission rather than direct expression. Tone becomes intention. Timing becomes motive. Contradiction becomes evidence of hidden meaning. Every interaction becomes a decoding process, and the cost of this shift is subtle but profound. You are no longer fully experiencing events themselves. You are experiencing interpretations of events as they happen. One is direct experience, the other is reconstructed reality, and those are not the same thing. Chapter 4. The inference engine activates. Once signal reading becomes habitual, interpretation becomes automatic. The mind no longer waits for clarity to emerge naturally. It begins generating clarity internally. Any ambiguity is immediately resolved through inference. Any inconsistency is assigned hidden explanation. Any uncertainty is filled with constructed meaning. This is the inference engine. It is not random imagination. It is predictive reconstruction under uncertainty. The mind is attempting to stabilize reality by continuously building explanatory models underneath observable events. But these models are not always being verified against reality at the same speed they are being created. So the system slowly becomes self-reinforcing. Interpretation starts depending less on confirmation and more on internal coherence. And coherence can exist even when accuracy does not. At this stage, interpretation begins overtaking observation, because interpretation feels safer than uncertainty. Even when interpretation is wrong, it still provides structure. And the mind often prefers structure over ambiguity once direct perception has become destabilized. Chapter 5. The loop. Interpretation becomes reality. Eventually, the system closes in on itself. An interpretation forms from incomplete information. That interpretation generates emotional meaning. The emotional meaning changes behavior. That behavior alters how the environment responds. And when the response from reality does not perfectly match the original interpretation, the mind does not necessarily reduce the interpretation. Instead, it deepens it. More inference is added to explain the mismatch. More hidden structure is assumed. Now the system is no longer simply interpreting reality. It is interpreting its own interpretations. Each cycle increases complexity. Each cycle reduces immediacy. Each cycle strengthens the belief that reality itself must contain concealed layers beneath visible experience. This is the loop, not because reality is necessarily hidden, but because the mind has learned to treat ambiguity as proof of hidden structure. Eventually, nothing feels simple anymore. Every interaction appears connected to a deeper pattern. Every inconsistency appears intentional, and the act of decoding reality becomes continuous because final resolution is never reached. Chapter 6. The cost, loss of direct experience. The greatest cost of this system is not confusion, it is distance. Direct experience slowly stops functioning as the primary mode of awareness. Instead of fully inhabiting the moment, awareness splits into parallel processes. One part experiences the event itself. The other part immediately analyzes the meaning behind the event. This creates constant psychological separation from immediacy. Even during ordinary interactions, the mind remains partially detached, continuously reconstructing interpretation beneath experience. What is happening becomes secondary to what it might imply. And over time, interpretation dominates awareness because it never fully turns off. Presence becomes fragmented. You are no longer completely inside reality as it unfolds. You are partially outside of it, observing and decoding it simultaneously. This creates a quiet but persistent sensation that reality itself feels slightly inaccessible, not absent, not unreal. Just no longer fully reachable without layers of interpretation standing between perception and experience. Chapter 7. Why the mind builds this system. This structure is not random. The mind does not create inference loops without reason. It builds them in response to instability. When communication becomes inconsistent, when emotional environments become unpredictable, and when direct interpretation repeatedly fails to produce reliable outcomes, the nervous system adapts. It increases depth of analysis. It searches for hidden order beneath visible confusion. In many situations, this adaptation is useful. It improves anticipation. It improves sensitivity to subtle patterns. It helps prevent repeated psychological injury. But when this mechanism expands too far, it begins detecting hidden meaning, even when hidden meaning does not exist. Uncertainty is no longer tolerated as uncertainty. It must immediately become explanation. And this creates a system where interpretation gradually replaces direct contact with reality itself. This is not malfunction. It is overextension, a protective mechanism expanding beyond its original purpose. A system designed to reduce uncertainty that eventually amplifies uncertainty by transforming every ambiguity into a problem that must be decoded. Chapter 8. Returning to surface reality. Escaping the loop does not require shutting down thought. The mind will always generate interpretation. The goal is not suppression. The goal is restoring hierarchy. Observation must return to primary position. Inference must return to secondary position. What was actually said, what was actually done. What can be directly confirmed without reconstruction. These become foundational again. Everything beyond that becomes possibility rather than certainty, hypothesis rather than conclusion. Meaning is not rejected. It is repositioned. Surface reality first, interpretation second. Because once inference becomes the dominant lens, reality stops being directly experienced. It becomes continuously reconstructed. And reconstructed reality, no matter how intricate it becomes, slowly drifts away from the moment it originally attempted to explain.